The cold winter wind howled across the Nevada territory like a wounded animal, rattling the weathered shutters of the Anderson family home as Mabel Anderson stood her ground, her blue eyes blazing with defiance despite the tears threatening to spill over. It was 1872, and at 20 years old, she had just committed the ultimate sin in her father's eyes, refusing to marry Bartholomew Winters, the wealthiest cattle baron in all of Genoa. "You will marry him, or you will no longer be welcome in this house," her father, William Anderson, thundered, his fist coming down hard on the dining table. The silverware jumped, much like Mabel's younger siblings who cowered in their seats. "Father, please," Mabel pleaded, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. "Mr. Winters is 53 years old. He's buried 2 wives already. I cannot." Her father's face reddened dangerously. "Cannot secure your family's future. Cannot save us from financial ruin. Bartholomew Winters has offered a generous sum for your hand, and you dare stand there speaking of what you cannot do." Her mother, Elizabeth, reached out to touch her husband's arm. "William, perhaps, be silent, woman," he snapped, shaking off her hand. His gaze returned to Mabel, cold as the Nevada winter outside. "Bartholomew will be here tomorrow expecting your answer. The answer will be yes, or you will pack your belongings and leave this house forever." Mabel's chin rose despite the tears now freely flowing down her cheeks. "Then I shall pack tonight." She didn't wait for a response, turning on her heel and climbing the stairs to her small bedroom. Her hands shook as she pulled her traveling bag from beneath her bed and began filling it with her modest possessions: 2 dresses, undergarments, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice her grandmother had given her, and the small pouch containing the few coins she'd saved from selling her embroidery work at the general store. The night passed in a blur of tears and whispered goodbyes to her siblings who snuck into her room after their parents had retired. By dawn, Mabel had written a final letter to her mother, slipped it beneath her parents' bedroom door, and walked out of the only home she'd ever known. The January morning was brutal, the air sharp enough to cut through her woolen coat as she trudged through Genoa's quiet streets. The town was just awakening, smoke rising from chimneys as families prepared for the day. Families with homes. Families who weren't casting out their daughters for refusing to marry men old enough to be their fathers. Mabel had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and Bartholomew Winters, who would arrive by midday expecting to claim her as his bride. She walked until the town disappeared behind her, following the road that led north, toward the scattered ranches that dotted the valley. By midday, exhaustion and cold had seeped into her bones. Her fingers had gone numb despite her gloves, and her face stung from the bitter wind. When she spotted a modest ranch house in the distance, with a large barn standing sturdy against the winter landscape, Mabel made her decision. She would rest, just for a little while, and then continue her journey. The barn door was unlocked, sliding open with a groan that made her wince and glance nervously toward the main house. No one appeared. Mabel slipped inside, greeted by the welcoming smell of hay and the soft nickering of horses. The warmth compared to the outside was immediate, if not exactly comfortable. She climbed the ladder to the hayloft, her legs trembling with fatigue. The hay was fresh and sweet-smelling, and when Mabel curled into it, pulling her coat tightly around her body, she found it was not the worst bed she had ever known. Sleep claimed her almost immediately, her body surrendering to exhaustion, her mind briefly escaping the reality of being homeless and alone at 20 years old in the unforgiving Nevada territory. Owen Ellison had been tracking the mountain lion for 3 days. The beast had already killed 2 of his calves and a neighbor's prized stallion. It wasn't the cat's fault the harsh winter had driven game down from the higher elevations, making livestock easy pickings, but Owen couldn't afford to lose any more of his small herd. The 26-year-old rancher rode his gelding, Thunder, back toward his property as the afternoon light began to fade. He'd lost the lion's trail in the rocky foothills and would have to try again tomorrow. His shoulders ached from the tension of the hunt, and his stomach growled, reminding him he'd eaten nothing since the jerky and hardtack he'd chewed at dawn. As he approached his barn, something felt off. The door was ajar, just slightly, but enough that he knew he hadn't left it that way. Owen dismounted, tying Thunder to the hitching post, and drew his Colt revolver from its holster. Rustlers were always a possibility, though they usually targeted the bigger spreads, not his modest ranch with its small herd. He pushed the barn door open slowly, wincing at the familiar creak. The interior was dim, lit only by the pale winter sunlight filtering through the cracks in the wooden slats. His horses stood calmly in their stalls, no sign of disturbance there. Owen moved silently through the barn, checking each corner, each shadow. A soft sound from above caught his attention. The hayloft. He holstered his pistol and climbed the ladder, muscles tensed for whatever he might find. What he found was entirely unexpected. A young woman lay curled in his hay, her dark blonde hair spilling out from beneath a knitted cap, her face flushed with sleep. A traveling bag rested near her head, and her gloved hands were tucked beneath her chin like a child's. Owen stood frozen, unsure how to proceed. She was clearly not a threat unless her aim was to steal his hay for a nap, which seemed unlikely. But what was a young woman doing alone in his barn? Genoa wasn't exactly teeming with drifters, especially not female ones. He cleared his throat loudly, deciding that startling her awake with his presence looming over her wouldn't be gentlemanly. Mabel jolted awake, her eyes flying open at the sound. She scrambled backward, nearly tumbling off the edge of the hayloft before catching herself, her wide blue eyes fixed on the tall man standing a few feet away. I'm sorry," she stammered, gathering her bag to her chest like a shield. "I didn't mean to trespass. I was just so tired and the cold." "Easy," Owen said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you, but you are on my property in my barn, so I think I'm owed an explanation." The woman, she couldn't be much more than 20, he guessed, straightened her shoulders despite the fear evident in her eyes. There was a certain dignity in the gesture that Owen couldn't help but admire. "My name is Mabel Anderson," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm from Genoa. I had to leave home rather suddenly and had nowhere else to go. I only meant to rest for a short while before moving on." Owen studied her for a long moment. Her clothes were of good quality, if not extravagant. She spoke well educated then, not a drifter or a criminal on the run. But had to leave home rather suddenly could mean any number of things, few of them good. "I'm Owen Ellison," he replied finally. "This is my ranch, and while I don't make a habit of hosting uninvited guests in my hayloft, I can't in good conscience send you back out into the cold with night coming on." He gestured toward the ladder. "Come down to the house. You can warm up properly, have something to eat, and tell me the full story." Mabel hesitated, her grip tightening on her bag. "That's very kind, Mr. Ellison, but I wouldn't want to impose further, Miss Anderson," Owen interrupted. "It's 15 degrees outside and dropping. There's a storm coming in from the mountains. Your choices are my house or my barn, and while I'm willing to bring you blankets and supper if you're dead set on staying out here, I think we both know that's foolishness." A hint of a smile touched her lips before disappearing. "When you put it that way, Mr. Ellison, I suppose I cannot refuse." Owen nodded, relieved she hadn't forced him to either abandon her to the cold or impose on her further. "Good. I'll go down first, then help you with your bag." The main house was a modest one-story structure, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney that currently emitted a promising curl of smoke. Owen had lit the fire that morning before leaving, banking it so it would still be alive when he returned. The interior was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, 2 small bedrooms off to one side, and a lean-to at the back that housed his tools and extra supplies. Mabel paused on the threshold, suddenly aware of the impropriety of entering a bachelor's home alone. But the alternative was the frigid barn or the even more frigid outdoors. She stepped inside, the warmth from the fireplace immediately enveloping her in blessed heat. "Please sit," Owen said, gesturing to one of the chairs at the small table. "I'll build up the fire and put on some coffee." Mabel removed her gloves and coat but kept her shawl wrapped around her shoulders as she sat. She watched Owen move about his home with the ease of long familiarity, adding logs to the fire, filling a coffee pot with water from a bucket near the door, and setting it on the cast iron stove that dominated one corner of the room. "Are you hungry?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder as he rummaged in a cupboard. "Yes," Mabel admitted, seeing no point in denying it. "I haven't eaten since yesterday evening." Owen frowned at that, turning to face her fully. "Yesterday, Miss Anderson, that won't do at all." He pulled bread, cheese, and some dried beef from his stores, arranging them on a plate which he set before her. "Eat. Then we can talk about why you're running away from home in the dead of winter with nothing but what you can carry in that bag." Mabel wanted to protest that she wasn't running away, she was cast out, which was entirely different, but the food before her demanded immediate attention. She ate with as much decorum as her hunger would allow, conscious of Owen's gaze on her between his own preparations. He was handsome, she realized belatedly, with sun-browned skin unusual for January, suggesting he spent most of his days outdoors regardless of season. Dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar, and eyes the color of the Nevada sky in summer. When she'd finished eating and the hot coffee had chased the last of the chill from her bones, Mabel knew it was time to explain herself. "My father arranged for me to marry Bartholomew Winters," she began, her fingers curling around her coffee cup. "Do you know him?" Owen's expression darkened. "Everyone in the territory knows Winters. Man owns half the grazing land between here and Carson City. Must be, 60 years old by now?" 53, Mabel corrected, "though that hardly makes a difference. He's buried 2 wives already. The last one was only 22 when she died in childbirth." She shuddered, unable to suppress it. "When I refused the match, my father gave me an ultimatum: marry Winters or leave his house forever. I chose to leave." Owen was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as though he was biting back words too harsh to speak aloud. Finally, he said, "Your father would sell you to a man like Winters. For what? Money." "Our farm has struggled these past few years," Mabel explained, though she felt no need to defend her father's actions. "Winters offered to pay off all our debts and provide a generous settlement besides. For that price, my father was willing to overlook the man's age and reputation. His reputation being that he works his ranch hands like slaves and treats his wives as broodmares," Owen said flatly. "Pardon my plain speaking, Miss Anderson, but there's no polite way to describe Bartholomew Winters. No need to apologize for the truth, Mr. Ellison." Mabel set down her empty cup. "So now you understand why I cannot return to Genoa. Winters is expected to collect my answer and me today. By now, my father has likely told him I've run off. I imagine they'll be searching for me." and you have nowhere else to go. No relatives or friends who might take you in. Mabel shook her head. My mother's family is back east. I've never even met them. My father's people are all in California, and they're cut from the same cloth as he is. They'd send me straight back to him. She straightened her shoulders again, that same dignified gesture Owen had noticed in the barn. I had planned to continue north, perhaps find work as a teacher or shop girl in Carson City. With winter setting in and no references, Owen asked gently. Miss Anderson, I don't mean to discourage you, but that's a difficult road you're choosing. I'm aware, she replied, a flash of something anger, determination, in her blue eyes, but it's the only road open to me now. Owen stood, pacing the length of his small home before turning back to her. Stay here, he said abruptly. Mabel blinked, certain she'd misheard. I beg your pardon, stay here, Owen repeated. At least until spring. I have a spare bedroom. It's small, but it's yours if you want it. You'll be safe here. Winters and his men rarely venture this far north, and if they do, they'll have to deal with me. His hand unconsciously moved to the revolver still holstered at his hip. Mr. Ellison, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly. You can earn your keep, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. I could use help around the place. My housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson, only comes in twice a week from town, and there's always more to do than hands to do it. You can cook, I assume? Yes, but good. I'm a terrible cook. Ask anyone who's ever suffered through one of my meals. A hint of a smile played around his mouth. Look, Miss Anderson, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a fair exchange room and board for your help around the ranch. When spring comes, if you still want to try your luck in Carson City, I won't stop you. But at least you'll have a few months to plan, to save a little money, and to wait out this winter somewhere safe. Mabel stared at him, trying to discern his motives. Men didn't simply offer young women shelter out of the goodness of their hearts. Her father's attempt to marry her off had taught her that much. But there was something in Owen Ellison's steady gaze that spoke of sincerity. Why would you do this for a stranger, Mr. Ellison? She asked finally. Owen's expression grew distant, his eyes fixing on some point beyond her shoulder. Because 8 years ago, I was 16 and on my own after my parents died in a fire. A rancher up near Virginia City took me in, gave me work, taught me everything I know about cattle and horses. When he passed on 3 years ago, he left me enough to buy this place. His gaze returned to her face. I'm just passing along the kindness that was shown to me when I needed it most. Mabel considered his offer. It was improper, certainly, for an unmarried woman to live in the home of an unmarried man. But propriety seemed a luxury she could no longer afford. The alternative was to brave the winter alone with little money and fewer prospects. If I accept, she said slowly, there would need to be understandings. Owen nodded, no hint of offense in his expression. Of course. My spare room has a lock on the door. You're welcome to use it. Mrs. Gunderson will vouch for my character, though I understand if you'd prefer to take no one's word but your own. I promise you'll be treated with nothing but respect in my home, Miss Anderson. Mabel believed him, surprising herself with the realization. Something about Owen Ellison inspired trust, despite their brief acquaintance. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he spoke, or the fact that he'd offered her food before demanding explanations, or simply the genuine concern in his eyes when she'd mentioned her father's ultimatum. Then, I accept your offer, Mr. Ellison, she said, extending her hand across the table. Until spring. Owen's hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused from hard work. Until spring, he agreed, a smile breaking across his face that transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made Mabel's heart skip a beat. And please call me Owen. Mr. Ellison was my father. Then you must call me Mabel, she replied, returning his smile cautiously. If we're to be housemates for the winter. Owen showed her to the spare bedroom, a small but tidy space with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the eastern pasture. As promised, there was a sturdy lock on the door. It's not much, he said, somewhat apologetically, but it's warm and dry. It's perfect, Mabel assured him, setting her bag on the bed. Thank you, Owen. He left her to settle in, and Mabel sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. That morning, she had awakened in her childhood home for the last time. Now, she was in the home of a man she'd met mere hours ago, planning to spend the winter as his housekeeper of sorts. Life could change direction with breathtaking speed, it seemed. She unpacked her few belongings, arranging them in the drawers with care. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed again, suddenly uncertain. What was she supposed to do now? A knock at the door answered her question. Mabel. Owen called. I'm heading out to check on the livestock before nightfall. Would you like to come along? Get a sense of the place. Mabel opened the door, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. I'd like that very much. The sky had cleared somewhat, though dark clouds still hung over the mountains to the west. Owen led her to the barn first, where he introduced her to his horses Thunder, the gelding he rode for most work, Duchess, a gentle mare he kept for light riding and occasional trips to town with the wagon, and Firefly, a spirited young filly he was still training. She's beautiful, Mabel said, admiring the filly's sleek lines and bright eyes. Did you raise her from birth? Owen confirmed, a note of pride in his voice. Her dam died bringing her into the world. I bottle-fed her, slept in the stall with her for the first week to keep her warm. He reached out to stroke the filly's nose, and she butted her head against his chest affectionately. She thinks she's a person now, not a horse. Follows me around like a puppy when I let her. They moved on to the cattle, a small herd of about 30 head, kept in the lower pasture during winter. Not much compared to winter's operation, Owen acknowledged, but they're mine free and clear. Good stock, too. I'm building up the herd slowly, selling off a few steers each year for cash and keeping the best for breeding. Mabel listened, fascinated by his obvious passion for his work. Her father had been a farmer, growing crops rather than raising livestock, and there had never been this spark of joy in his voice when he spoke of his fields. How long have you had this place? She asked as they walked back toward the house, the setting sun painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. 3 years, Owen replied. It was run down when I bought it. Previous owner let it go to seed after his wife died. Took a lot of work to get it to where it is now. He glanced at her. Still plenty to do, of course. Always is on a ranch. It's lovely, Mabel said sincerely. You've created something special here. Owen's expression softened, and he looked around his property with fresh eyes as though seeing it through hers. I suppose I have, he agreed quietly. Thank you for saying so. That evening, Mabel insisted on cooking dinner despite Owen's protests that she should rest after her ordeal. Nonsense, she said firmly. I've accepted your hospitality. The least I can do is prepare a meal. She surveyed his kitchen stores with a critical eye. Though I see Mrs. Gunderson hasn't been by recently. Not since Monday, Owen admitted. She usually comes Mondays and Thursdays, but with the weather turning, she probably won't make it tomorrow. Mabel nodded, already planning what she could do with the available ingredients. Then I'll make do with what we have. How do you feel about biscuits and gravy with fried potatoes? Owen's stomach growled loudly in response, making them both laugh. I think that's a yes, Mabel said, rolling up her sleeves. As she cooked, Owen set the table and told her more about his life growing up the son of shopkeepers in Missouri. losing his parents in a fire that consumed their store and home, making his way west as a young man with nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination to build something of his own. "What about you?" he asked as they sat down to eat. "What was life like before your father tried to marry you off to Winters?" Mabel considered the question as she served their plates. "Quiet, mostly. My mother taught me to read and write, to keep accounts, to sew and cook. I helped with my younger siblings. I have 2 brothers and a sister, all younger than me. When I was 16, I spent a year teaching at the schoolhouse in Genoa while the regular teacher was back east caring for her ailing mother." "You enjoyed that, teaching?" "Very much," Mabel admitted, a genuine smile lighting her features. "The children were wonderful, even the troublemakers. There's something magical about watching a child understand something new for the first time, seeing that light come into their eyes." "Is that what you hope to do in Carson City? Find another teaching position?" Mabel nodded. "If possible, though I know those positions are rare and usually go to men or widows, not." She trailed off, uncertain how to describe her current status. "Not young women who have refused to marry Bartholomew Winters," Owen supplied with a wry smile. "Exactly." They fell into comfortable silence as they ate, the only sounds the occasional howl of wind outside and the crackle of the fire in the hearth. It was strange, Mabel thought, how quickly comfort could be found in the most unexpected places. 24 hours ago, she would never have imagined herself sitting across a dinner table from Owen Ellison, sharing a meal and conversation as though they'd known each other for years rather than hours. Life, it seemed, was full of such surprises. The following morning, Mabel woke to the sound of wind battering the small window of her room. She rose and dressed quickly, the chill in the air evident despite the house being warmer than she would have expected. When she entered the main room, she found Owen already up, stoking the fire with fresh logs. "Good morning," he greeted her, straightening up from his task. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Mabel admitted. "Your spare bed is certainly more comfortable than your hayloft." Owen chuckled. "Glad to hear it. I'm afraid we're in for a proper storm today. Already got about 3 inches of new snow overnight, and it's coming down harder now." He gestured toward the window where fat white flakes swirled in a frenzied dance. "Will the animals be all right?" Mabel asked, concerned. "They'll be fine. The cattle have a sheltered area in the lower pasture, and I'll check on them after breakfast. The horses are snug in the barn." He moved to the stove, where a pot of coffee was already brewing. "Speaking of breakfast, I usually just have coffee and whatever's left from the night before, but if you're hungry—" "I'll make us something proper," Mabel offered, already rolling up her sleeves. "You go tend to your morning chores, and by the time you're done, breakfast will be ready." Owen looked like he might protest, then thought better of it. "All right. Thank you." While he bundled up and headed out into the storm, Mabel familiarized herself with his kitchen, finding flour, eggs, and a precious jar of molasses tucked away in the pantry. By the time Owen returned, stamping snow from his boots and bringing a gust of cold air with him through the door, she had a batch of molasses griddle cakes keeping warm by the stove and was frying the last of his bacon. "Something smells amazing," Owen said, hanging his coat by the door and crossing to the wash basin to clean his hands. "Just griddle cakes and bacon," Mabel replied, trying to hide her pleasure at his obvious appreciation. "Nothing fancy. Fancy enough for me. I usually burn griddle cakes beyond recognition." They ate together at the small table, the storm outside making the warmth of the house even more precious. Owen told her about his plans for the ranch, the additional acreage he hoped to purchase come spring, the new breeding stock he was eyeing, the repairs needed on the north pasture fence. "I've been meaning to redo the vegetable garden too," he added, sopping up the last of the molasses with his final bite of griddle cake. "The soil's good, but I never seem to find the time between everything else. End up buying most of my produce from the Wilsons down the road." "I could help with that," Mabel offered. "I managed our garden at home. It's good soil here, you said." Owen nodded. "Rich as anything, just needs a proper planting and tending. Then consider it done come spring." Mabel paused, realizing the implication of her words. "That is if I'm still here when planting season arrives." "Right," Owen agreed, his expression unreadable. "If you're still here." The storm continued all day, keeping them confined to the house. Mabel took the opportunity to do a thorough inventory of the pantry and to clean the kitchen properly. Owen worked at his desk in the corner, going over his ledgers and accounts. "Anything I can help with?" Mabel asked, noticing his furrowed brow as he scratched calculations on a piece of paper. Owen glanced up, surprised. "You know bookkeeping, my mother taught me," Mabel confirmed. "I kept the household accounts from the time I was 16. "Then I'd welcome your eyes on these figures," Owen admitted, pushing the ledger toward her. "I'm decent with numbers, but sometimes they swim together after a while." Mabel pulled up a chair beside him and bent over the ledger. The numbers were meticulously recorded, but she quickly spotted a calculation error that had been throwing off his totals for the past 3 months. "Here," she said, pointing to the entry. "You carried the wrong digit in September, and it's been affecting everything since." Owen stared at the page, then at her, his expression a mix of surprise and admiration. "You're right. How did I miss that?" He grabbed his pencil and began correcting the figures. "This changes everything. I thought I was running much closer to the edge than I actually am." "You're doing well, then?" Mabel asked. "Better than I realized," Owen confirmed, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Mabel. You may have just saved me weeks of unnecessary worry." The way he said her name sent a small shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "Happy to help," she replied, aware that her cheeks felt suddenly warm. The storm lasted 3 days, during which time Mabel and Owen fell into a comfortable routine. She cooked and cleaned while he tended to the animals and kept the fires burning. In the evenings, they sat by the hearth, Mabel mending some of Owen's clothes that had been piling up in a basket. "Mrs. Gunderson refuses to sew for me," he explained sheepishly. "Says her eyes aren't what they used to be," while Owen read aloud from one of his books. On the 4th morning, Mabel woke to sunshine streaming through her window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Every branch, every fence post, every surface was coated in pristine white snow that sparkled like diamonds in the morning light. "It's beautiful," she breathed, standing at the window in the main room after breakfast. "It is," Owen agreed, coming to stand beside her. "But we'll need to dig ourselves out. The path to the barn is completely snowed in." They spent the morning clearing paths to the barn, the chicken coop, and the woodpile. Mabel insisted on helping despite Owen's initial protests, and soon they were working side by side, their breath creating clouds in the cold air. "You're stronger than you look," Owen commented as Mabel hefted a shovelful of snow off the path. "Farm work builds muscle," she replied with a grin, tossing the snow onto the growing pile beside them. "I may be a woman, but I'm not made of porcelain." "I'm beginning to see that," Owen said, a new respect in his voice. As January gave way to February, Mabel settled more deeply into life at the Ellison ranch. Mrs. Gunderson, when she finally made it out after the storm, was delighted to find another woman in the house. "About time this place had a woman's touch," the older woman declared, her Norwegian accent thickening with her approval. "Too long Owen has been alone with only an old woman like me coming by twice a week. Not good for a young man." "It's only until spring," Mabel explained hastily, aware of the matchmaking gleam in Mrs. Gunderson's eye. "I'll be moving on to Carson City then." "We will see," Mrs. Gunderson replied cryptically, exchanging a look with Owen that made him suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. February brought more snow, but also bright, crisp days when the sun turned the white landscape into a blinding spectacle. On one such day, Owen suggested they ride out to check the herd. "You can ride, yes?" he asked as they entered the barn. "Since I was a child," Mabel confirmed. "Though it's been some time since I've had the opportunity." Owen saddled Duchess for her, the gentle mare standing patiently as Mabel adjusted her skirts for riding. They set out across the snow-covered pasture, Mabel quickly remembering the rhythm of horseback riding. The cold air stung her cheeks, but the sunshine and the exhilaration of being on horseback again made it worthwhile. The cattle were doing well, huddled together near the sheltered area Owen had created for them. As they rode back toward the house, Owen suggested a detour. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said, guiding Thunder toward a rise to the east of the main property. Mabel followed, curious. When they reached the top of the rise, Owen reined in his horse and waited for her to come alongside him. The view took her breath away. From this vantage point, she could see the entire valley spread out below them, the snow-covered landscape stretching all the way to the distant mountains. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said softly. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Owen told her, his eyes taking in the vista. "Whenever I have a difficult decision to make or I'm feeling overwhelmed, I come up here. Somehow, seeing everything laid out like this, it puts things in perspective." Mabel understood completely. "It makes your problems seem smaller when you can see how vast the world is." Owen turned to look at her, an expression in his eyes she couldn't quite read. "Exactly." As they sat there on their horses, side by side, gazing out at the winter landscape, something shifted between them. It wasn't anything either of them said or did, but Mabel felt it nonetheless, a deepening of connection, a sense that she was no longer merely a guest in Owen's home, but something more. The feeling lingered as they rode back to the ranch, as they cared for the horses together, as they prepared and ate dinner that evening. There was a new awareness in the air, a tension that wasn't unpleasant but was decidedly present. That night, as Mabel lay in her bed listening to the wind outside, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Owen Ellison. The realization should have frightened her after all. She'd fled her home to avoid an unwanted marriage, but instead, it filled her with a warm glow that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. Owen, meanwhile, was having a similar realization in his own room across the hallway. He hadn't meant for this to happen. When he'd offered Mabel shelter, it had been out of genuine concern and a desire to help someone in need. But somewhere along the way, between shared meals and conversations by the fire, between watching her care for his home as though it were her own, and seeing her face light up at the view from his favorite spot on the ranch, he'd fallen in love with her. The knowledge complicated everything. Come spring, Mabel planned to leave for Carson City. She'd been clear about that from the beginning. And even if she stayed, what could he offer her? His ranch was modest at best, his future far from secure. A woman like Mabel, educated, refined, capable, deserved more than a struggling rancher could provide. Yet the thought of her leaving in spring made his chest ache in a way he'd never experienced before. February turned to March, the days gradually lengthening, the sun gaining strength. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing muddy earth beneath. Signs of spring's approach were everywhere, birds returning from their winter migrations, buds appearing on the trees, the first brave crocuses poking through the snow near the south side of the house. With each sign of spring, a sense of urgency grew in both Mabel and Owen, though neither spoke of it. Their days continued much as before, but there was an underlying current now, a sense that time was running out. Their conversations sometimes faltered into loaded silences, their eyes meeting across the room and then quickly darting away. One evening in mid-March, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Owen finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "Spring's coming fast," he said, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Yes," Mabel agreed, her hands stilling on the shirt she was mending. "You'll be heading to Carson City soon, I expect." Mabel's throat felt suddenly tight. That was the plan. Owen nodded slowly, still not looking at her. "The plan," he echoed. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finally, Owen turned to face her. "What if I asked you to stay?" The question hung in the air, weighted with everything unspoken between them. Mabel's heart hammered in her chest. "Why would you ask me that?" she replied, though she knew the answer. Owen set aside the book he'd been pretending to read and leaned forward in his chair. "Because these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Because the thought of this house without you in it feels wrong somehow. Because," he took a deep breath, "because I think I'm falling in love with you, Mabel Anderson." The words she'd longed to hear, yet feared at the same time. Mabel set aside her mending, her hands trembling slightly. "Owen, she began, but was interrupted by a sudden pounding on the front door. They both froze, staring at each other. It was past 8 in the evening, well after the time anyone would normally call, especially out here where neighbors were few and far between. Owen rose, his hand automatically moving to check that his revolver was still at his hip. "Stay here," he told Mabel, his voice low. He crossed to the door, stance wary, and called out, "Who's there?" "Owen Ellison," a gruff voice responded. "I'm looking for Mabel Anderson." "I have reason to believe she's here." Mabel's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. Jim Tanner, one of Bartholomew Winters' men. Owen glanced back at her, saw the fear on her face, and his expression hardened. "There's no one by that name here," he called back through the door. "You've got the wrong ranch." "I don't think so," Tanner replied. "Winters has been searching for her for 2 months. Got word from a trapper who passed through that he saw a young woman matching her description riding with you last week. Open up, Ellison. We just want to talk to the girl." "She's not here," Owen insisted, his hand now resting openly on his revolver. "And even if she was, she's a free woman, not property to be claimed." Mabel stood, moving to Owen's side despite his gesture for her to stay back. "It's all right," she said softly. "Let me handle this." Before Owen could stop her, she called out, "Mr. Tanner, this is Mabel Anderson. I will not be returning to Genoa, nor will I be marrying Mr. Winters. Please convey that message to him and to my father." There was a pause, then a low chuckle from the other side of the door. "Miss Anderson, I'm afraid it's not that simple. Mr. Winters is not a man who takes no for an answer. He's offering a reward for your return, dead or alive. Now, I'd prefer alive, being a gentleman and all, but some of the boys who are out looking might not be so particular." Owen's face darkened with fury. "Are you threatening her?" he demanded, his voice deadly quiet. "Just stating facts, Ellison. Now, why don't you open this door so we can discuss this civilized-like?" Owen turned to Mabel, his voice low. "Go to my room. Under the bed there's a shotgun. Bring it. Then go out the back window and run for the barn. Duchess is already saddled. I was going to ride out at dawn to check the north fence. Take her and ride for the Wilson place. It's 3 miles south. Don't stop for anything." "I won't leave you here to face them alone," Mabel protested. "Mabel." Owen's eyes bored into hers, intense and unwavering. "Do as I say, please." Something in his voice made her obey. She hurried to his room, found the shotgun exactly where he'd said, and brought it back to him. But instead of going out the back window as instructed, she positioned herself to the side of the door, shotgun at the ready. Owen saw her and opened his mouth to protest, but Tanner's voice came again, more insistent this time. "I'm losing patience, Ellison. Open this door or we'll break it down." Owen called back. "How many men you got out there, Tanner?" "Enough," came the reply. "Last chance to do this the easy way." Owen glanced at Mabel, saw the determination in her eyes, and gave a slight nod. Then he positioned himself behind the door, revolver drawn. "All right," he called out, his voice deceptively calm. "I'm opening the door, but I want your word that the lady won't be harmed." "You have it," Tanner replied smoothly. "Mr. Winters wants his bride intact." Owen's jaw clenched at that, but he reached for the door handle. "Step back from the door, then," he instructed. "I'm opening it now." He unlatched the door and swung it open, keeping himself behind it as a shield. Tanner stepped into the doorway, his own revolver drawn, a smug smile on his weather-beaten face. "Now, where's the—" he began, but stopped short when he saw Mabel standing to the side, the shotgun leveled at his chest. "Mr. Tanner," she said, her voice steadier than her racing heart, "I believe I've made my position clear. I will not be marrying Mr. Winters. Not now, not ever. Please leave my home." Tanner's eyes narrowed at her use of "my home," but before he could respond, Owen stepped out from behind the door, his revolver now pressed against the back of Tanner's head. "You heard the lady," Owen said coldly. "Now, how many men do you have with you?" Tanner hesitated, clearly calculating his odds. "Just 2 others," he admitted finally. "They're covering the back of the house." "Call them," Owen ordered. "Tell them to come around front, slowly with their hands where I can see them." Tanner complied, calling out to his companions. Soon, 2 more men appeared, their hands raised when they saw the situation inside. "Here's what's going to happen," Owen said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're going to get on your horses and ride back to Winters. You're going to tell him that Mabel Anderson is under my protection now. If he sends anyone else after her, they won't be riding back to deliver a report. Am I clear?" "Winters won't like this," Tanner warned, though his bravado had faded considerably with a revolver to his head and a shotgun to his chest. "I don't particularly care what Winters likes," Owen replied. "Now go, and don't come back." The 3 men backed away slowly, then mounted their horses and rode off into the night. Owen kept his revolver trained on them until they disappeared from sight, then quickly closed and barred the door. He turned to find Mabel still standing where he'd left her, the shotgun now lowered, her face pale but composed. "Are you all right?" he asked, crossing to her side. Mabel nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she set the shotgun aside. "Yes. Do you think they'll come back?" "Not tonight," Owen said, moving to check that all the windows were secured. "But Winters won't give up easily. We should be prepared for them to return, perhaps with more men next time." "I've brought this trouble to your door," Mabel said softly, guilt evident in her voice. "I'm so sorry, Owen." He turned to her, his expression fierce. "Don't apologize, not for this. Winters is the one who should be sorry, threatening a woman, sending men to drag her back against her will." He ran a hand through his hair, his agitation visible. "We should pack, get ready to leave if necessary." "Leave?" "But this is your home, your ranch. You can't abandon it because of me." "I'd abandon 10 ranches if it meant keeping you safe," Owen said without hesitation, the words coming straight from his heart. Mabel stared at him, the full import of his statement washing over her. Before she could respond, he continued, his words coming faster now, as though a dam had broken. "Earlier, before we were interrupted, I was trying to tell you something. I'm not good with words like this, but I need to say it now while I have the chance." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Mabel Anderson, I love you. I think I've loved you since I found you sleeping in my hayloft. These past 2 months have shown me what my life could be like with you in it, and I don't want to go back to what it was before." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you plan to go to Carson City. I know you fled your home to avoid being forced into marriage. The last thing I want is to be another man telling you what your future should be. But if you feel anything for me, anything at all, I'm asking you to consider staying. Not as my housekeeper, not as a guest, but as my wife." Mabel's breath caught in her throat. The words she dreamed of hearing, yet never truly expected. For a moment, fear flashed through her, fear of making another mistake, of trading one cage for another. But as she looked into Owen's eyes, she saw nothing there but sincere love and respect. "Owen," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "when my father tried to force me to marry Bartholomew Winters, it wasn't just his age or his reputation that made me refuse. It was the knowledge that I would be nothing more than a possession to him, a pretty trophy to bear his children and grace his table." She squeezed his hands, her eyes never leaving his. "But with you, I've never felt that way. You've treated me as an equal from the beginning. You've valued my opinions, my skills, my company. You've made me feel—" She paused, searching for the right words. "You've made me feel like I belong here, like I belong with you." Hope dawned in Owen's eyes. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice tentative. Mabel smiled, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Owen Ellison, I will stay. I will be your wife, because I love you too." Owen pulled her into his arms, his heart pounding against hers. When their lips met for the first time, it was like coming home, a sensation of rightness, of completion, that neither had ever experienced before. They spent the rest of the night making plans, both for their immediate safety and for their future together. They decided that the next day they would ride to Carson City to be married by the justice of the peace there, away from Winters' immediate influence. Afterwards, they would return to the ranch, but with additional precautions in place. "We'll hire some extra hands," Owen decided. "Men I trust, who can help keep watch until Winters gives up his pursuit." "Do you think he ever will?" Mabel asked. Owen considered this. "Men like Winters aren't used to being denied what they want, but they're also practical. Once you're legally my wife, his claim on you, not that he ever had one, will be even weaker. Eventually, he'll move on to easier prey." The thought sent a chill down Mabel's spine, but she pushed it aside. She wouldn't let fear of Bartholomew Winters taint her happiness with Owen. True to their plan, they set out for Carson City at dawn the next morning. The journey took most of the day, but by late afternoon they stood before the justice of the peace, speaking their vows with clear voices and full hearts. Mrs. Wilson, wife of their neighbor, and her eldest son served as witnesses, having accompanied them for precisely that purpose after Owen rode to their ranch at first light to request their help. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the justice declared, beaming at the young couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Ellison." Owen did so with enthusiasm, causing Mrs. Wilson to dab at her eyes with a handkerchief and her son to look away in embarrassment. They spent their wedding night at Carson City's modest hotel, both too keenly aware of the threat from Winters to fully relax, but determined to enjoy their first night as husband and wife nonetheless. "Mrs. Ellison," Owen murmured as they lay together in the darkness, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," Mabel replied, snuggling closer to him. "Absolutely perfect." They returned to the ranch the following day to find Mrs. Gunderson waiting for them, hands on her hips. "So," she said, her accent thick with emotion, You marry without telling old Mrs. Gunderson. I should be very angry with you both." "We're sorry," Mabel began, but the older woman waved her apology away. "Nonsense. I am only teasing. Come here, both of you." She enveloped them in a surprisingly strong embrace. "I am happy for you, so happy." Over the next few weeks, they settled into married life while maintaining a vigilant watch for any sign of Winters or his men. Owen hired 2 ranch hands he knew from his time working near Virginia City, brothers named Tom and Frank Riley. Both handy with guns and fiercely loyal. Spring arrived in earnest, the snow melting completely, revealing the brown earth beneath. Mabel began preparing the garden, turning the soil and planning what to plant. Owen worked on repairing fences damaged by winter storms and preparing for the spring calving season. Their evenings were spent together by the fire, planning for the future improvements to the house, expansion of the herd, dreams of children someday playing in the yard. The shadow of Bartholomew Winters gradually receded as weeks passed with no sign of his men. Then, on a warm day in early May, as Mabel was hanging laundry to dry in the sunshine, a cloud of dust appeared on the road leading to the ranch. Her heart leapt into her throat as she called for Owen, who emerged from the barn, saw the approaching riders, and quickly moved to her side, the Riley brothers appearing moments later with rifles in hand. As the riders drew closer, Mabel realized it wasn't Winters' men at all, but a single wagon accompanied by a man on horseback. And in the wagon sat a familiar figure, her mother, Elizabeth Anderson. "Mother," Mabel gasped as the wagon pulled to a stop in the yard. Elizabeth Anderson climbed down with the help of the driver, a young man Mabel recognized as one of their neighbors from Genoa. Her mother looked older than when Mabel had last seen her, worry lines etched more deeply around her eyes and mouth. "Mabel," she said, her voice breaking on the name. "Oh, my darling girl." Mabel rushed forward into her mother's arms, tears flowing freely from both women. Owen hung back, giving them space for their reunion, but keeping a wary eye on the man who had accompanied them. "How did you find me?" Mabel asked when they finally broke apart. "It wasn't easy," Elizabeth admitted. "When you left, your father was furious. He told everyone you'd run off to avoid your responsibilities. But I knew you must have had good reason." She glanced at Owen, taking in his protective stance near her daughter. "I'm guessing this is that reason." Mabel followed her gaze, smiling through her tears. "Mother, this is Owen Ellison, my husband." Elizabeth's eyes widened at that, but she recovered quickly. "Your husband? Oh, Mabel." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Anderson," Owen said, stepping forward to take her hand. "I'm sorry it wasn't under more traditional circumstances." Elizabeth studied him for a long moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she saw. "Well, you certainly look more suitable than Bartholomew Winters," she said frankly. "But I would have liked to have been at my only daughter's wedding. It was somewhat rushed," Mabel explained. "Winters sent men after me. We felt it best to marry quickly to strengthen Owen's legal right to protect me." Elizabeth's face darkened. "That man." "I never wanted the match, Mabel, you must believe that, but your father." She trailed off, her expression troubled. "How is father?" Mabel asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Elizabeth's eyes dropped. "He's gone, Mabel, 3 weeks ago, his heart." The news hit Mabel like a physical blow. Despite everything, she had never stopped loving her father, even as she defied him. "Gone," she repeated, her voice small. Her mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "That's partly why I'm here, the farm. It's not doing well, your father's debts." She squared her shoulders. "I've decided to sell and move to San Francisco. Your Aunt Margaret has offered me a place to stay, but I couldn't leave without finding you first, without making sure you were safe." Owen stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Mabel's back. "Mrs. Anderson, please stay with us for a few days. You've had a long journey and I'm sure you and Mabel have much to discuss." Elizabeth looked at him gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Ellison. I'd like that very much." "Owen, please," he corrected her with a gentle smile. "We're family now, after all." Over the next few days, Mabel and her mother repaired the breach that had formed between them. Elizabeth shared news of Mabel's siblings. Her sister was being courted by the banker's son, her youngest brother excelling in school, her middle brother apprenticed to the blacksmith. She also brought word that Bartholomew Winters, after learning of Mabel's marriage, had finally given up his pursuit and was now courting a widow from Carson City. He wasn't pleased, Elizabeth confided as she helped Mabel in the garden, but even Winters knows better than to come between a lawfully wedded husband and wife, especially when that husband has a reputation for being handy with a gun. She cast a meaningful glance toward Owen, who was working with the Riley brothers to break a new horse in the corral nearby. Mabel followed her gaze, a smile spreading across her face as she watched her husband. In the 3 months since their marriage, her love for him had only deepened. Each day brought new discoveries about him: his patience with fractious animals, his quiet generosity toward those in need, his unexpected sense of humor that emerged when he was truly comfortable. "You love him very much," Elizabeth observed, watching her daughter's face. "More than I ever thought possible," Mabel admitted. "When I left home, I was only thinking of escape. I never imagined I'd find this." Elizabeth's eyes softened. "Your father and I had that once, you know, before the hardships, before the disappointments." She sighed. "I'm glad you found it, Mabel. Hold on to it. Nurture it." "I will," Mabel promised, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Elizabeth stayed for a week before continuing on to San Francisco. Her departure was emotional but not devastating. They had made their peace with each other, and promises to write regularly softened the separation. Summer arrived, bringing long days of work and warm evenings spent on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The garden flourished under Mabel's care, yielding vegetables in abundance. The spring calves grew strong, promising a good return when it came time to sell. In July, Mabel made an announcement over breakfast that caused Owen to drop his fork with a clatter. "A baby." He repeated, his eyes wide with wonder. "You're sure?" Mabel nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "Mrs. Gunderson confirmed it yesterday. She says I'm about 2 months along. We should expect him or her around February." Owen was around the table in an instant, lifting Mabel from her chair and spinning her in a circle, his face alight with joy. "A baby," he said again, setting her gently on her feet and placing a reverent hand over hers on her stomach. "Our baby." The months that followed were busy ones. Owen, driven by the impending arrival of their child, worked tirelessly to improve the ranch, adding a room to the house, reinforcing the roof, ensuring everything would be perfect for the new addition to their family. Mabel prepared a nursery in the new room, sewing blankets and clothes, transforming the space with the feminine touches that had gradually spread throughout the rest of the house. The Riley brothers, who had stayed on as permanent hands, built a cradle as a gift, the craftsmanship so fine that Mabel wept when they presented it to her. Winter arrived, not as harsh as the previous year but still cold enough to keep them close to home. As Mabel's body changed with the growing child, Owen's protective instincts intensified. He insisted on doing the heavier chores, fretting whenever she exerted herself too much. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Mabel reminded him one evening as he tried to take a pot of stew from her hands. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know." "Not my wife," Owen countered, succeeding in claiming the pot. "Not with my child. Indulge me, Mabel." She relented, touched by his concern despite her outward protests. In truth, as her pregnancy progressed, she was grateful for his attentiveness. When the baby began to move, Owen spent hours with his hand on her belly, his expression one of awe each time he felt a kick or punch. "Strong," he would say, pride evident in his voice. "Just like his mother." "Or her mother," Mabel would counter, smiling. February arrived with a series of snowstorms that left the ranch isolated for days at a time. Mabel's time grew near, and Owen's anxiety peaked. He had arranged for the doctor from Carson City to come stay with them for the last week of her confinement, but the weather made that impossible. "Mrs. Gunderson has delivered dozens of babies," Mabel assured him, rubbing her lower back as she paced the main room, her discomfort growing. "And you've delivered calves. Between the two of you, I'm in good hands." Owen didn't look convinced, but there was little choice in the matter. When Mabel's labor began in earnest, he sent Frank Riley to fetch Mrs. Gunderson from her cabin a mile away, while he helped Mabel to their bed. The labor was long 18 hours of pain and effort that tested Mabel's strength to its limits. Owen never left her side, wiping her brow, holding her hand through contractions, his face a mask of concern and love. "You're doing wonderfully," he told her again and again. "So strong, so brave. I love you, Mabel, more than anything." Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Owen's eyes. Mrs. Gunderson cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him in Mabel's arms. "He's perfect," Mabel whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the shock of dark hair that matched his father's. "Look what we made, Owen." Owen sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Mabel's shoulders, his gaze fixed on his son's face. "What shall we call him?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Mabel studied the baby's face, already seeing hints of Owen in his features. "William," she decided, "after my father. Despite everything, he would have been proud to have a grandson." Owen nodded, understanding the complex emotions behind her choice. "William Ellison. It's a good name. A strong name." Mrs. Gunderson, watching from the doorway, smiled at the scene before quietly withdrawing, leaving the new family to their private moment of joy. The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings to the Ellison family. The ranch prospered under Owen's careful management, eventually growing to 3 times its original size. Mabel's garden expanded into a small orchard, providing fruit for the family and extra to sell in town. William was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and another brother, James, 2 years after that. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk, helping with chores as they grew older, filling the once quiet house with laughter and occasional chaos. Mabel's mother visited regularly, eventually moving to a small house in Carson City to be closer to her grandchildren. The shadow of Bartholomew Winters faded completely when news reached them of his death in 1880, felled by a heart attack at the age of 61, survived by his 4th wife, a widow 20 years his junior. Through it all, Mabel and Owen's love remained the cornerstone of their family. Each night, after the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch in good weather or by the fire in winter, talking over the day's events, planning for the future, or simply enjoying the comfort of each other's company. On one such evening, 10 years to the day since Owen had found Mabel sleeping in his hayloft, they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever wonder," Mabel asked, her head resting on Owen's shoulder, "what might have happened if my father hadn't tried to force me to marry Winters? If I had never run away that day?" Owen considered the question, his arm tightening around her. "I suppose I'd still be here, running this ranch alone, reading my books by the fire each night, wondering why the house felt so empty despite Mrs. Gunderson's best efforts. And I'd be in Genoa still, teaching perhaps, living with my parents, watching my siblings marry and start their own families. Owen turned to her, his eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. It sounds like a lonely life for both of us. Mabel nodded, reaching up to touch his cheek, still handsome despite the lines that 10 years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes and mouth. Instead, we found each other, against all odds, against all sense and propriety. Best decision I ever made, offering shelter to the pretty thief I found sleeping in my hay, Owen teased, pressing a kiss to her palm. Best decision I ever made, accepting it, Mabel replied softly. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the sky awash in deepening purple, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch horses nickering in the barn, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft creaking of the porch swing beneath them. It wasn't the life either of them had envisioned for themselves all those years ago. It was better, richer, fuller, more complete than anything they could have imagined. A life built on love freely given and freely accepted, on mutual respect and shared dreams, on the unexpected joy of finding home in another person's arms. And as stars began to appear in the darkening sky above their ranch, their home, their legacy, Mabel and Owen Ellison counted themselves among the fortunate few who had found their true place in the world, together.